morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where we actually have a surprising amount of comic book movie news to discuss, even with Comic-Con just around the corner. But then again, 2 of our 3 stories are from Marvel, and they're not going to Comic-Con, and have again proven that whenever they announce a story, it's basically Comic-Con. And their latest story, which they actually have shared custody with Sony, has gotten a muted reaction. I think it's actually a little bit similar to when James Wan was announced as the director of Aquaman. These, when they kind of let a story, I guess you could say, bleed out, it really robs the project and the talent involved of that real bombshell announcement, right? A little bit also like Benedict Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange. Like, the thing is a rumor months in advance. So all the headlines already come out then. And the way the internet works is that, the earliest headlines go, the earliest headlines, no matter when they're posted, even if they're not relevant to the, the new developments in the story, come up first. This is true like in Google, YouTube, everywhere. So whenever the story finally breaks, there's this glut of coverage from the rumor that kind of keeps it from being a big explosion online, as I'm sure all involved parties intend it to be. So it's a little bit of the business side of movie reporting these days, and I think something that they need to be a little bit more savvy of on the studio side, right? When you let these rumors hang in the air for so long, and also it's just like an anticipation thing, it's not like, you just blew my mind, who's Spider-Man? You're like, okay, you finally cast it took you forever, and of course you allow people to get their hopes up that someone else might get the role, as was the case, I think, with Spider-Man. So many people felt that other people were going to get it, so that when Tom Holland finally got it, there was a lot of disappointed people. Also, as I stated in my reaction, Tom Holland is such a blank slate that it's kind of hard to have much of a reaction because nobody really knows anything about him. But anyway, the reason he's in Morning Movie News again today is because Variety reported that he's only going to have really a cameo in Captain America 3 Civil War. Now, I think this is very interesting. Now, Variety put a very nice and polite spin on it for Marvel and Sony, and they said that's why there was no rush to casting, because they knew he'd only have to be filming for a week, and he didn't have to film until now, so they could take their time in selecting the actor. But I call BS on that, because here's why. First of all, Tom Holland has been sitting in Atlanta for at least an extra week or so. We know from his Instagram account. So clearly they had them in position to be like, get on set, film your role. Also, Kevin Feige really went to bat to bring Spider-Man over to the MCU specifically for Captain America 3 Civil War, right? He wrote 2 different scripts, that was the big rumor, but who writes 2 different scripts for a cameo? I guess so you can spread Spider-Man throughout, right? So I guess maybe they're hinting to him throughout the movie, being like, where did this webbing come from? Are those fingerprints on the glass on the Avengers? But although the Avengers are now located in upstate New York, so Spider-Man wouldn't be swinging out there anyway. And if he did, he wouldn't have to really climb the wall. But I think that it makes no sense that he would just have a cameo and make all that effort. But then that also, and also we know that there were arguments over who to cast as Spider-Man, right? So I think that was the real delay. And right away, this Sony-Marvel relationship is not working out and hurting the projects of everyone involved, particularly Marvel, because now it looks like Spider-Man, all the time left, it's like on a game show. I'm sorry, that's all the time we have left. Well, the Russo brothers are like, I'm filming, so if he wants to show up now, we can give him a cameo. But I just think it's so weird, and I don't know what this is going to mean for not only Spider-Man in Civil War, but what it means for Kevin Feige fighting for him in the first place, right? And whether or not it was worth it. I have a sneaking suspicion that this is going to be a huge mistake that is one of the big things that helps to maybe give Marvel a hard time. It's already on a slippery slope, but we'll see. But I'm curious how you guys feel. What do you think of the idea of Spider-Man just having a cameo? Are you I'll take what I can get? Or do you think that, if that's all it is, none of this was really worth it? And it wasn't worth Marvel, perhaps hurting their property, the MCU, by bringing in this outside character from a different studio, right? Just for a cameo, it makes no sense. Unless he's gonna go to space in Avengers Infinity War, but we'll see. So anyway, that's the first story of the day, and I'm curious to what you think. Do you believe the spin? Do you believe that this was they only all along intended just a cameo, and so that's why they took their time in the casting? Or do you think that's just Variety doing Marvel a solid, Sony and Marvel a solid, and because we've heard, from the leaks that clearly the studios will call up the press and be like, help me out. I mean, we saw George Clooney say, please help me with Monuments Men. It's a mess. You guys got to cushion the blow from the critics and the papers. So, Sony can make some calls, and so I think that's what happened here. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. Now, the second story of the day is that Scott Derrickson said, hey, I'm going to London to shoot Doctor Strange. And I know that they have a lot of sound stages out in the UK, and that's why they shoot a lot of movies there, particularly big budget blockbusters that need sound stages. But I think that considering that Benedict Cumberbatch is the lead here, this is just getting more and more like Sherlock, the mystical edition. So I question the choice to do that, especially because, they might just be shooting on sound stages, but, Doctor Strange is very much rooted in New York. He's a New York surgeon, and sure, he travels to train with the Ancient One and discover all the mystical arts, but then he goes back to New York. Now, maybe they're like, oh, that's a lot of New York in the MCU, everything's based in New York, and it's like, well, yeah, for a long time, the comic book industry was based in New York, so that's why, up until like a year ago, it was all based in New York. Now, a lot of it, Marvel is still here, DC has moved to LA, because Warner Brothers wants them closer, so they can look over their shoulder literally and be like, could you change that? Or wouldn't it be cool if you did this? But anyway, speaking of movies making changes to comics, that's another thing about Doctor Strange, and there was an announcement yesterday that Marvel is going to have a new Doctor Strange solo comic, obviously to raise the profile of the character going into his film, which comes out really soon, 2016, and we're not hearing anything about it. I guess this is what things starting to rumble. And we'll probably get a look of Doctor Strange pretty soon if they're close to begin shooting. Although, unless they don't shoot outside, right? Or if Doctor Strange can cast an anti-paparazzi spell. But anyway, the comic book is written by Jason Aaron, who's on a roll right now. He's the one behind Female Thor. Also, he writes a great book called Southern Bastards. It's an Image comic, independent, and it actually just got, I think, optioned as a TV show. It's very good. But anyway, and then Chris Bachalo is going to be the artist on it. So that's a pretty all-star team right there. Although Chris Bachalo, I think his artwork, it's a little bit hard to decipher what you're looking at sometimes. His most recent X-Men run was a little bit tough, but he's a really great guy. So anyway, the interesting thing about this is that they've given Doctor Strange weapons. He has an axe, a really big axe, and I'm like, that looks a lot like Mjolnir. I think Thor could be upset about that. He's like, first Vision takes my cape, now Doctor Strange has his own Mjolnir-like weapon. This is getting ridiculous. I need a lawyer. And then also they're giving Doctor Strange a bow and arrow, and these are physical weapons. They're not even mystical energy weapons. I'd be like, couldn't you at least conjure that up? And also he has a shield in one of these pictures, as you can see, and a hooded cape, which totally reeks of a movie choice, right? They're like, he's in the shadows. I'm like, Doctor Strange was wearing a cape for decades, and he hasn't never had a hood. He has that weird cool collar thingy, but I guess the movie's costume department was like, that is a pain in the butt. I don't want to deal with it. And it frames Cumberbatch's face weird, and who in modern day would wear that? I'm like, he's a sorcerer. He's got to have some sorcerer aspects to it. Although, again, watch Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell on the BBC. It's available on YouTube. It's available on iTunes. I believe it's available on demand by your local cable provider. It's really good. And it really kind of is Sherlock as a mystical, genre. So that's, I think, largely what Doctor Strange is probably going to be. But I'm curious to what you guys think. What do you think of these changes with Doctor Strange's arsenal of weapons? Isn't he just supposed to use magic? He's a surgeon after all. He's not particularly strong. I guess the arrows are precision, but and also, Hawkeye. How's Hawkeye going to feel about that? He should be even more upset. He's like, come on, are you kidding me? He's like, I'm just going to go to the farm. And Doctor Strange is like, funny you should mention that. I also have a farm in England. He's like, God damn it. But anyway, what do you think of the changes via the comic? And then also, what do you think of shooting in London with Benedict Cumberbatch? Do you think it's just a little too Sherlock? He's even going to probably have black hair. I'd be like, you better give him a buzz cut or something, because it's just getting ridiculous. All right, now the third story of the day is a DC story and a little rumor about something they might announce at Comic-Con. Now, of course, as we discussed earlier this week, Warner Brothers is going to have to blow the roof off of Comic-Con because there's no one else to do it, because Marvel's not going to be there. Maybe another studio will step up, but everybody's expecting big things from Warner Brothers. Now, of course, with Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad, but apparently there might be a Green Lantern announcement. And this is that they might have cast their Green Lanterns, and they're going to do not Hal Jordan, or not just Hal Jordan, but they're going to focus on 2 or 3 human Green Lanterns as part of the Green Lantern Corps, which I think is an interesting way to go. I think it's good to highlight the core aspects. I mean, I believe the movie tried to, but with aliens. You know, Ryan Reynolds' Hal Jordan was the only human. And of course, there are a number of human Green Lanterns. So the ones in contention, because there are, again, a lot to choose from, but the ones that Warner Brothers is considering to join Hal Jordan are maybe Jon Stewart, and then maybe also additionally Guy Gardner. And I actually think that's a pretty good group of guys, because they're all very different. So you kind of, it's like the Minions. You've got 3 very different personalities working together. But yeah, there'll still be some dust-ups, because they're, again, all very different. And Guy Gardner, of course, I think is most famous recently for becoming a Red Lantern. But also on that note, I think that the Blackest Night storyline is one of the best DC crossover events I've ever read, actually. And so I can only see that being the reason to try and shoehorn the Green Lanterns into the DCU, right? I mean, I guess they're like, we gotta have the full set for Justice League. I'm like, do you really? I mean, I think that they have so much on their plate at this point of characters they're trying to not only introduce to the big screen for like sometimes a second or third time, or just in general for the first time, which is equally difficult, but also reinvent. Like, look what they're trying to do with Aquaman, right? I think Wonder Woman, we're hearing a lot of changes potentially there. So, you know, that's enough. Just get those guys right, and then Green Lantern can be part of a second wave. I also think that Green Lantern is very hard to pull off from a powers perspective. You know, I think it's a little bit too easy for jokes, and I think it's hard, I think, sometimes for audiences to wrap their head around, you know, that I can make anything out of green light. And especially when they start to go the cartoon route of like, I made a giant bunny or a fly swatter. I mean, I think one of the reasons that Jon Stewart works so well in the Justice League Unlimited animated series is because he just used it as like geometric shapes largely, or force fields or beams. You're like, oh, I get it. It's kind of like the Invisible Woman. You have a malleable force field. It was just a little bit easier to comprehend. You know, it wasn't just too out there. And so I think that, you know, anything that gets Jon Stewart on the big screen, I think is a good idea. And I don't think this sounds like a total, like, slam dunk. I'm not like, wow, you fixed it. But I think it sounds promising, and I think people would just be so happy to see other Green Lanterns up there that I think people will be very happy. I don't understand this obsession with Hal Jordan. I know that Jeff Johns, who is a very big, important person at DC and also in contributing to the DC movies, you know, as an advisor, and also especially the TV shows, is a big Green Lantern fan. But I just, you know, I think that Hal Jordan, you know, he had his day. I think he's popular with like a different like generation of fans. And I think today's fans, you know, like I don't have a relationship with Hal Jordan. I'm not like, you can't leave Hal Jordan out. I'm like, I'm not particularly into it. He could sit this one out. I'm much more interested in seeing Jon Stewart come to the big screen. And if you want to throw Guy Gardner in there, sure, why not? And, you know, of course, they have that new Middle Eastern Green Lantern, which could be interesting as well. But they're already potentially going to explore that with Shazam, although they cast Dwayne Johnson as Black Adam, even though Black Adam is supposed to be a Middle Eastern character, although Dwayne Johnson could easily play that. So I'm curious to what you think of this. Do you like this new idea for how to handle a Green Lanterns movie? Do you think it's a good time to bring in the Green Lanterns to the DCCU? It's so hard to say, but you guys insist that's what it is. It's the DCU as far as I feel it should be. But so what the DCCU, do you think it's a good time to bring them in? And who would you like to see maybe as Jon Stewart or Guy Gardner? I mean, there's not a lot of talent left on the table unless they're willing to consider, you know, unknowns. So let's go to the viewer question from Daniel Caustic. Daniel Caustic asked me this about a week or so ago, but I really liked the question. I saved it, and so he also put a ton of different, not just smiley faces, but all different expressions. So he really used the emojis. He went to town with the emojis. But Daniel Caustic said, "Hey Grace, I've got a question. Do you think as comic book movies get darker, so should kids movies to the level of like The Black Cauldron or Bambi?" I think that's a really good question, and you know, I'm not the emotional manipulativeness of Pixar, which I still firmly believe in, even though we're having a disagreement about that, some of us. But I do agree that Black Cauldron, Bambi, Secret of Nim, you know, there was a time when you know, animated films, you know, didn't just like have characters sacrifice themselves or die, but you know, the circumstances, the stakes were raised, and they dealt with truly evil villains, right? Not just like, I'm a bumbling villain, you know. I think like the most recent version like that was Dr. Facilier in The Princess and the Frog. Things got a little dark with him, but still not as dark as they could have gotten. So I think that's a very interesting question. I would personally like to see it. I would like to see some risks taken to animation in general. Now, I love what animation is doing overall. I think it's a great time to be an animation fan. Just saw Minions, thought it was fantastic. A lot of great animation trailers debuted with Inside Out, so we have a lot of great projects on the horizon. But I know that these comedies and these really brightly colored, fun ideas are doing really well. But I would love to see someone take a risk with going darker, as Daniel recommended, or doing maybe something aimed a little bit more at adults, like Legend of Korra. I mean, it's been proven that there's some interest in that, and as we get a more of a global marketplace, those animated films could perhaps find audiences abroad. Especially animation's doing very well abroad. But I think Hollywood's always very reluctant to to go into uncharted territory. It usually has to be like a visionary filmmaker or something. So I guess the key to this would be to try and coax filmmakers into animation, right? You see so many animation directors trying to go into live action, like Andrew Stanton, Brad Bird. Wouldn't it be cool if someone like Christopher Nolan was like, I'm going to make an animated movie. He doesn't even, take so long to make them. He could do it in the same time as he was doing something else, right? Maybe he could co-direct with an animation director. And the animation director could handle the long-term haul, but then the live action director could come in there and, handle shot ideas, character ideas, script ideas. I think that could be really interesting. And Disney's being pretty inventive, although I wonder if Cinderella will stop their inventiveness with their live action fairy tale adaptations because it was so well received and was just so strictly stuck to the source material there, and that being the animated classic. I think that the Disney fairy tales might be sticking the live action to inventiveness and production design. But I would really like to see some inventiveness, and maybe we'll see it with the upcoming live action adaptation of the Fantasia segment, Night on Bald Mountain. But that's what I'd like. I like some risk taking, and maybe maybe it will take comic book movies going darker to see animation go the same route. It's a tough call though, because when you cut out the child audience when you do that, so these things would have to do close to $1 billion. You'd have to have Warner Brothers just printing out billion-dollar club comic book movies, and then maybe when an animation would go, maybe we should try that. Maybe the Lego movie might try it. The Lego movie had some pretty dark moments, and that's a great example of live-action filmmakers, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, going into animation, and that's the kind of result you get. So I guess that would be what I think is the key, and I think it's still a little bit of a long shot, but, everything eventually, Hollywood and everything is cyclical, so they're going to have to change something up to keep the animation train going, and maybe that'll be it. But I'm curious, is anybody else interested in seeing something like that? I'd like to see it. I think that's the kind of stuff that really sticks with you, especially when you're a kid. I'm sure many of you have rented older animated movies or streamed them and been like, oh, that gave me the heebie-jeebies, and I loved it. All right, that's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.